assistant, and also on that trek is an 18-year-old kid by the name of John Johnson. Johnson is an Irish immigrant, come to the United States as a young boy, grew up in the Philadelphia area, and then went on to what you and I would call the Defense Department. Back then they called it the War Department, and he goes to the War Department, gets himself a job, gets sent out to Cincinnati to work with animals. So he's kind of a civilian employee. So he's about 18, Harrison's a little bit older than that, and they meet the first time. You may remember that trek comes right through this part of the world. Wayne and his forces actually built a fort on this property in the winter of 1792. We think it was located right exactly where the modern museum now sits. So when you walk away from the museum, turn around and look back, what you're supposed to see is kind of a modern rendition of a fort. So that's supposed to be an architect's look at kind of a 20th century look at a fort, but that was the actual location of the fort. That trek ends in 1794, basically, and it happens up in northwestern Ohio. There's a large battle with Indians. Now, Indians are not surprised about what's going on, so we know something's going to be happening. So in August of 1794, Wayne's forces engaged Indians on a grassy land near the Maumee River that we now call Fallen Timbers. It's called Fallen Timbers because tornadoes had blown down a lot of trees and things. And so Wayne's forces are pretty quickly victorious at Fallen Timbers. By the way, there's an interesting memorial up there if you ever want to go that way to see that. But following that activity, Johnson actually brings back a copper kettle off the battlefield. So if you've been to the house to see the large copper kettle that's hanging in the lower kitchen, supposedly that big kettle was brought back by Johnson after the battle was over. So that was a large, nice artifact for us to have here at the site. Following the Battle of Fallen Timbers, the Indians agreed to hold treaty talks. They were held in July of 1795 in Greenville, Ohio. And out of the treaty talks comes the large Treaty of Greenville. So it's an interesting time in American history. This is the frontier. So I know you're here to hear part of that in other time frames, but that's what's going on. That's the first meeting between Johnson and Harrison. The last of the meeting is equally interesting. You may remember that the American government is getting ready to hold a federal election, an election for president in 1840. And so there are really three political parties that are putting forward candidates. And Mr. Harrison, who has once before allowed his name to be put into nomination, his name is being circulated as a possible candidate to run for the presidency in 1840. And so Mr. Johnson, who is of the same political party, they're both Whigs. Whigs were W-H-I-G, they were conservatives in that generation. And so Mr. Johnson gets on his horse right here at the barn. He rides to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He's a nominee for the Whig Convention of 1840. And after several ballots, Mr. Harrison is nominated to run for the Whig Party. But the Whigs have a little problem because they can't get somebody to run as the vice president. Nobody kind of comes up. And so the Whigs finally settle on someone who is not actually a Whig. He's a person who says, I'm sympathetic to your campaign, but I'm not a Whig. And his name was John Tyler. John Tyler was the junior senator from Virginia in 1840. And so does anybody remember the political slogan of the campaign of 1840? Tippecanoe. Tippecanoe is Old Tippecanoe, which is William Henry Harrison from the Battle of Tippecanoe, Indiana, 1811. And Tyler, of course, John Tyler, the junior senator from Virginia. The Whigs are successful. They win the election after some interesting kind of fights and some interesting name-calling. If you think name-calling is something new in this generation, I have a book you ought to read. It's called 200 Years of Mudslinging in America. So it's an interesting story about what we've said to each other and how we do those kind of things. But the Whigs are victorious. The inaugurals are held in March in that period in our history. And so on March the 14th of 1841, Harrison and Tyler go to Washington, D.C. to be sworn in. They say the oath of office. It's a nasty, nasty day in Washington, D.C. It's been raining and snowing. It's been a terrible time. And Harrison is just incensed by all the nasty things that the Democrats have said about him. And so he takes his hat and coat off in the middle of a thunder shower, and he proceeds to give the longest single speech ever given by an incoming American president. It's an hour and 40-minute speech, acceptance speech. He's really hanging on those Democrats, not happy about the Democrats, the way they've treated him. So finally, after the speech is over, he puts his hat and his coat back on, he goes off to the parties. Well, the next morning when Mr. Harrison wakes up, he's not feeling real good. A couple of days later, he wakes up, he's got a pretty good cold out of it, and about three or 4 days later, he develops pneumonia, and Mr. Harrison is bedfast from there until his death 30 days after his inaugural. So Mr. Harrison has a couple little asterisks next to his name. One is that he is the person who serves the American presidency the shortest of any American president, only 30 days. Everybody's angry. The Democrats are angry. The Whigs are angry because Tyler didn't win the election. Nobody wanted Tyler anyways. They wanted Harrison. And so it's just a simply interesting time. Of course, Mr. Johnson is president for all those activities. He's